Hi, I'm David BALDACCI. Welcome to Live Signing with Jeffrey Archer. Live signing is a great way to get a book signed if you're not actually at the event. And today we are most fortunate to have Jeffrey Archer in attendance to talk to us about his new book, which you can get a signed copy of by going to premiercollectibles.com/next in line. Without further ado, Jeffrey Archer, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and I'm very greatly honored to have a writer of such distinction interviewing me.
Well, it's great to be here with you today. And I love the book, as you know. I gave you a blurb on it. It was well deserved. It was a classic Archer and had so many types of things that I love about it. You know, the plot was crisp, the characters were memorable, the research was spot on, not too much, not too little. It took me to a world I really didn't know a whole lot about, but found fascinating. So I think people would probably like to know about this next William Warwick novel, and tell us about Next in Line.
Well, William Warwick has moved on to royalty protection because in each book he has a different subject, and in each book he moves to a different rank. So he began his life as a constable on the beat and then moved into the art fraud squad. He then, in the second book, goes into the drug squad. In the third book, he goes into police corruption. And in the fourth book, murder. And with each book, he goes up from a constable on the beat to a sergeant, to an inspector, to a chief inspector. And in this book, he is a superintendent and he is in charge of royalty protection. So I had to do a lot of research. I had a very great privilege of knowing Princess Diana and working with her. And so met both her security officers and have been able to talk to them. So when you were very kind comments on the research, my research, David, is people. I like to talk to people who've been in the middle, who've done that thing. So in the last book, it was head of the murder squad. This time it was head of royalty protection. And then I had a situation where I found out that 30 years ago, the head of the royalty protection was making money on the side and taking advantage of the royal family without them knowing it. And so I found the lady, a chief inspector, who had been in charge of nailing him and getting him thrown out of the force. And she came to see me, and it was 30 years ago. And she said, as long as you don't actually name him and name what he was doing, I'll tell you exactly what we did. And on the other side was the protection of Princess Diana. So I ran, as you know, the two against each other, almost two subplots or two plots, and you follow both.
What I found fascinating when you're doing a series like this, you know there's going to be multiple books. I've had some of those as well. Now you said that you put them in a different rank and you sort of went up with each book. Before you sat down to write the first book, did you have that sort of arc in mind that that's what you were going to do with the character, or did that sort of grow organically as you were writing the books?
I have to confess that individual thing of moving him up in ranks and doing a different crime scenario with each one came early. By nature, I'm an organic writer. I pick up a pen and pray. But I did know, because I was very worried about, in the crime world, almost everything has been done. It's quite difficult to be original. And I thought this process of taking him from constable through to commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in a series of 8 books was, I hoped, original. And then I thought, if we do a different subject every single time, that in itself is original. And if I combine the two, maybe I'll be doing something that not every other crime writer is doing.
Right. No, I totally get that, because you're right. There have been a lot of great crime fiction out there. A lot of subject matters have been covered, and it is difficult to sort of get an original hook of what you want to do. But I like your research, approach, because I sort of do the same thing. Anybody can Wikipedia stuff. You can go online and Google anything, but going out and actually talking to people and listening, which is a lost art, unfortunately, listening to people and getting, inside their heads and their hearts about how they do something and why they do it, the motivations behind it. That's the stuff that should be in books. That's the stuff that readers want to know about. Anybody can find out the specifications on a gun or a weapon or whatever, but not into the heads and hearts of the people who actually do those jobs. And that comes through in your novels. I can typically tell, within the first 20 or 30 pages, if an author has actually gone out and done any research in the field or talked to people who actually did this. And you clearly did, and it came through quite clearly in reading the novel. So I try to do the very same thing. Now, it was fascinating to me that, and I'm sure you'd like to talk about some of your experiences with Princess Diana as a character in the novel. And what was that like?
Well, I had the privilege of working with her for many years. I began as I did an auction for her because she was a great fundraiser, and that's my hobby. My hobby is, which is why so many auctions get into the books. But my hobby is a charity auctioneer. And then we became friends. And then a very strange situation. The Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, John Major, got a call from her saying, and they were discussing, and I didn't know this was going on, they were discussing her speech for withdrawing from public life. And she asked the Prime Minister if I could be with her all day, which was very flattering. So I spent that particular day with her. I'd been to her home, she'd been to my home. We wrote to each other regularly, we spoke on the phone, but this was a big decision she made, and I think it was the first time I realized how close we were. And so 25 years later, I thought, if I'm going to write about royalty protection, I actually knew one of the royals who was very carefully protected, and I knew both her protection officers. So I'd seen a lot of it. Of course, I had to go back to them and triple check and find things out. And that I'm with you. I think that's the fun. I think when they get, frankly, you're an old pro, so I'll say this to you. 9 times out of 10, it's a waste of bloody time. They chunter on about things you either know about or are plain boring. And then suddenly they come up with a gem, a little gem, and they don't realize it's a gem because it's been part of their life, but not part of my life. And I say, stop, that's magic. I want more detail on that. And they look at me and think, but that's boring, Jeffrey. Yes, I said, it's boring to you, but it isn't boring to my readers.
Right. No, it's exactly right. Those are the little treasure moments that you hope when you go out and interview someone, you're going to get at least one of them before you leave for the day. And that's really all you can hope for. It's really all you can hope for. Now, I know that a lot of readers over here have been introduced and have read about MI5, MI6, and some of the other services over there. I had never really read anything about the Rural Protection Command before. Can you sort of give us a thumbnail about how they're set up and how they operate?
Well, they are genuinely an individual service in their own right. They're part of the Metropolitan Police. But the problem they were finding and this is what I did the research on, is the man at the very top, who was the superintendent, was a law unto himself. And they were quite frightened to deal with him because he was dealing with Her Majesty the Queen. He was dealing with Prince Charles. He was dealing with members of the royal family. And they weren't quite sure. And they knew he got on well with them professionally. And they weren't quite sure how to deal with him. So when they discovered what he was up to, they had to go at it fairly gently. They didn't need to have trouble with the royal family over this. So I had to look into it very carefully indeed. Now, I'm very lucky, David. I don't know what it is for you, but I have 2 particular police people, one man, one woman. I have a chief superintendent, which is a very high rank, who was head of the murder squad and is now retired. And I have a sergeant lady called Michelle Roycroft, who was in the drug squad and then in the murder squad. And they are my 2 researchers. And what they look for is that I don't make silly mistakes. If it's a desk sergeant, not a custody sergeant. It can be such silly things one can do. And decent readers will pick that up, and it spoils the book for them. Because if they spot a mistake like that, they wonder if the rest of the book has any other verisimilitude, which makes sense. So I accept that. So people, for me, as we discussed earlier, are very important. But looking into this, very few people in Britain know about the Royalty Protection Service. It's a very kept, quiet business. So I thought that would fascinate people. And your country has a genuine fascination in our royal family. I've never quite understood why, but you seem to have. Diana was as popular in America as she was in England, and I'm told that you've been watching the death of Her Majesty and the funeral and
Yes.
what has happened after the funeral with great interest. And there are many Americans who tease me and say, "Well, you're not a democratic country, Jeffrey." We are a democratic country. We have a president, and we have the Congress, and we have the Senate, and you have the Commons. The House of Lords are appointed, and you have a monarch. So you can't describe yourself as a democracy. And of course, I say to my American friends, who I love and adore, of course you're right, but frankly, very much, it works. So we'll go as we are. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.
Well, I know a lot of people over here are thinking that there are quite a few benefits to having a parliamentary government, where things can change a little faster than they do over here. American democracy is a wonderful thing, but it's also designed to move with the speed of a glacier, when sometimes more speed is needed. So, yeah, every government feature has its benefits, and it's also its downside.
Well, our royal family, I know it's all wrong. You should not have someone who gets privilege simply because of the cot they're born in. I accept that. I accept that. But I always think, what's the alternative? The alternative is some football player becoming president, or some ex-politician who nobody was really sure about becoming president. So I think we like our system, and I'm afraid every American who says to me, "But it's undemocratic, Jeffrey," I say, "Yes, you're quite right. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, you're quite right."
Well, but it's also a significant part of your history as well, and who your identity is, your national identity as a country. And as you said, the world is fascinated by this. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the passing of the Queen, and your thoughts on the monarchy moving forward under King Charles.
Well, I think I would say, because I'm 82 years old, and I therefore am an Elizabethan. She was crowned when I was 12 years old, and I watched it on black and white television. She died when I was 82, so I've had 70 years of a reign. I am an Elizabethan. And she's just part of our lives. And I have to say, I thought she'd live forever. I thought she'd live to 100. And so it came as a terrific shock that she appointed a prime minister on the Tuesday and sadly died 2 years later on the Thursday. If either of us had put that in a book, David, we'd have been laughed at. They'd have said, "You don't be so silly." So the touching thing was, they placed her coffin in Westminster Hall, which is a big hall next to the House of Commons and House of Lords, and they allowed the public to walk past it, and 250,000 people walked past it, and it was sometimes taking 20 hours to reach the coffin. And when you did, you were only there for a minute, 2 minutes when you paid your respects. So what we saw was the whole country coming together, which was a good thing. Now, we've all been wondering what it would be like to have a king, and it was seamless. We now have King Charles III. He immediately addressed the British people by going to Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and back to London. He had made 4 very important speeches, which it became clear to me had been very well prepared. And I think the monarchy, long live the king, has moved on, and in a very professional and very impressive way that a politician like myself, ex-politician like myself, could only be very impressed by.
Right. It seemed well planned, very efficient, something that Queen Elizabeth II would have wanted it that way. I mean, regardless of what
don't kid yourself, David. Not wanted that way. She prepared it inch for inch. It was not a coincidence that the coffin went down the high street in Edinburgh first. It was not a coincidence that it then came to London. All the things I could see, they'd all been planned to an inch, and her imprimatur was very clearly there to be seen.
Yes. Well, she served, faithfully and dutifully for, as you said, over 7 decades, and she showed up every day, and it was quite impressive. It really was. I You talked about your process of writing and how you do it organically. Let's dive into that a little bit before we start taking some questions. And let me know about your process and has it changed over time?
Do you know, I'm so old I can't remember if it has changed over time, David. But I certainly now, or for the last endless books, I rise at 5:30. I work from 6 until 8. I take a 2-hour break. I work from 10 until 12. I take a 2-hour break. I work from 2 until 4. I take a 2-hour break. I work from 6 until 8. I'll go to bed around 9:30, 10, up again at 5:30. The first draft will take 6 weeks, about 300 hours. And by the time I've done 14 drafts, every one of them handwritten, I hand it in to the publisher. So I would hope after 26 books it would be easier. It isn't. I like to believe I'm a better craftsman, but the amount of work I still have to do has not changed.
Yeah. Well, I've always thought, even when you have a process in place, it's a sort of job where you really get good at something you may approach it in the same sort of way, getting up at the same time, working the same number of hours, and looking at, finishing a draft in a certain number of days. But it's the creative process is totally different. It's like you have to approach it differently, the creative process, because you're creating a brand new world with every new book. With pretty much every other occupation, you get really good at something by doing the same thing over and over again to get rid of all the types of errors that humans make from time to time. I always give the analogy of I'd never want to be on a plane with a pilot. He said, I've flown this plane the same way for 30 years. Today, I'm going to try something different. I would not want to be on that plane when the pilot said that. But as a writer, if you don't sort of shake yourself up and approach new material and scare yourself, can I really do this again? Then you end up writing the same book over and over again, but only simply changing the names. So I applaud the process you do. But you're right. When people say it must get easier, you've written so many books, I said, no, it doesn't. It's not, because every book is a brand new challenge. It's like birthing a new child over and over again. And there might be something similar a little bit about the process. I know how long I want it to be. But other than that, unless I'm writing about a series character, I have to create, and you do too, a brand new world all over again.
That's the bit I find exciting.
Yes,
so
me too.
That's the privilege. But I'll pick up one thing you said, David. I actually think, when young people come to see me about wanting to be a writer, I say, I want you to go to the ballet. And they say, what? I say, yes, I want you to go to the ballet. I want you to see the prima ballerina. And I want you to, because you'll know straight away how many hours she has spent becoming the prima ballerina. Then I want you to look at the dancers behind and remember how many hours they spent just to get on the stage with the prima ballerina. Then I want you to think about all the young women who are desperate to get on the stage and don't get on the stage. Why would it be different to get to number 1 on the New York Times bestsellers list than to be the prima ballerina? It's damned hard work if you're lucky enough to have the gift of telling a story, and it's a God-given gift. That's one thing. But you can't. I remember an Irishman saying to me once when I addressed Trinity College Dublin, he came up to me, "You've ruined my life, Geoffrey." I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "You've ruined my life. I was going to write the great Irish novel this weekend." And of course he was teasing me. But what I got over to him was, this is just as hard as being the prima ballerina.
Yeah, there are no shortcuts. I tell people no one masters the craft of writing. We're all apprentices for life.
Absolutely right.
The only thing you can hope to do is get a little bit better with each book. But don't think that it's not going to come from the sweat of your brow. It's hard work. And that's one reason when people come up to me and say, I know I have a book inside of me. I wish I had time to write it. I know right away they're never going to write the book because
no, and they haven't got it inside of them either. That's the most. You and I get that the whole time. Yes. They come up to me and they say, "Geoffrey, if you wrote my life story, it would be one of the world's bestsellers. And what's more, I'll split half the proceeds with you. So I say to them, well, that's very kind. I said, have you murdered your mother? And they say, no, I haven't murdered my mother. So far, I think we'll move on then. The truth is, in answer to that great statement, there's a book in every one of us, there isn't. But what there is in every one of us is a vignette, a short story, an incident that is truly, truly remarkable to you, the person. And when we hear about it, it's wonderful because our readers don't know about it. And of the 92 short stories I have written, 61 were given to me by people who'd had an incident in their life that I took and embellished and used. So yes, there's a short story in almost every human being. Sometimes they don't realize it's in there, and I have to get them on the ground and kick them to get it out of them. But I know it's in there in almost every person.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, people are unique and they have unique experiences, and that is a great way. And again, it's a great way for us to get ideas too. And people ask, where do you get your ideas from? I said, it's quite simple. I get up every day and I walk out the door. I don't stare at my iPhone all day. I'm actually listening to people, watching.
Yeah, but you're wrong, David. You are wrong. That's naughty of you. That's bad of you, because you leave people to believe that if they walk out of the front door, they'll be able to do it. And you're not right. You have a gift to tell a story. Now, I don't deny that coming out the front door for you and touching people, feeling people, listening to people is part of the game. Yes. But don't you do anything as wicked as let anybody believe that if they walk out of the door and follow you for 100 yards, they'll suddenly be able to tell a story. They won't.
I will not do that. I will retract that part. It's when I walk out the door, I get the ideas. Well, I look at it, you know, and I've had it since I was a kid, and I'm sure you had too. I call it the writer's prism. We look at the world a little bit differently. We see what everybody else sees, but we just add a little bit of pixie dust, a fictional piece of our imagination. We hear something that intrigues us, and all of a sudden, a story starts to form. For most people, that does not happen. They stop at the first stop, which is they just see what's in front of them. They don't go any farther than that. And our job, our gift, what we do for a living, we go beyond that, you know, and we think what could be there, what could be the potential of what I'm seeing if I add a few little bits of pixie dust here and there, a little bit of imagination here and there, and all of a sudden you take reality and take it to something else, to another level, an art form that can be turned into a story. And really,
that's the God-given gift, David.
Yeah, it is.
You cannot go down to a superstore and say, I'll have a packet of stories, please. You can't do it.
I promise I won't. Well, let's get some, we got a bunch of questions from people, so let's start with those. This is Carlton from Idaho, the United States. He wants to know, what inspired you to write this book now?
Well, everybody thinks that I planned it to come out, that next in line would be now. Of course I didn't. You will be able to confirm what I'm about to say is true for almost any author. I wrote the book 2 years ago. I handed it in a year ago. The press have had it for the last 2 months. And it's called Next in Line, and it's about Princess Diana as one of the subjects. No, and it's the 25th year of her death this year. She'd be 61 this year. No, it wasn't planned. It doesn't work like that. Just like the point I made to you earlier, David, if either of us sat down and wrote a book about the Prime Minister being appointed on Tuesday and the monarch dying on Thursday, we'd both be laughed. Our publishers would say, can't do that, can't do that. So it'd been in my mind for some time. And so the next book, which I'm working on at the moment, has nothing to do with that. The next book he's still in royalty protection, but this one will deal with Her Majesty the Queen. Oh. Now, I wasn't to know she would be dead, but I'm back 20 years, so I'm okay there. Right. You can't plan these things.
No, you can't, particularly around real people. And it's fiction, so you have wide latitude. You can write about whatever you want to write about. So that's correct. That's the grand thing. The next one is from Timothy in California. He wants to know, is there a main theme that you want your readers to gain from Next in Line?
No, Timothy. I am not a lecturer. I am not a pontificator. I want you to turn the page and enjoy it. In fact, the only thing I really want is for you not to be able to stop turning the page. That's the only thing I aim at. If at the end of it, you come out with a little bit more knowledge of art or politics in your country or politics in my country, you come out with a bit of, you enjoy the characters, you enjoy William Warwick and Miles Faulkner, that's a bonus for me. But I want you not to be able to put the book down. Now, you will know, David, that's damned hard work. It's draft after draft to make sure that it just flows and flows and flows. But no, I am not a lecturer. Thank you very much, Timothy. Just enjoy the book.
And you know, in the job of writing page turners and keeping people's attention for 400 plus pages, and we now live in the world of TikTok, where, you know, 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 seconds is the attention span of so many people, particularly younger people, and it's a challenge, you know, because it could take that long just to read a half a page, and so it's a different length than 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Very different, and different in so many ways, not just TikTok, but all the social media, excellent films. I go to the theatre here in London twice a week. I love films. I love Netflix. I love everything. So you're up against a big, like when Charles Dickens was alive, he didn't have any radio, television, or TikTok. He was a great writer and a great storyteller, but that's what he did, and there was no one else. So they bought a book and they wanted it to last for weeks because there was nothing else for them. We've been born in an age where I don't know about you, David, but I'm happy that anybody takes the trouble to read my book, because you can't have a book of 400 pages that's not going to take 6 hours, 5 hours of someone's life. And as you pointed out, nowadays the attention span is so short. So I'm honored with Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel has now been read by 100 million people. And it's 600 pages, David. And it's on its 132nd reprint. So don't give up, young man. They'll still be reading you long after I've gone. So don't fuss about that. There's still a lot of readers out there. And you're just going to have to work harder to get the ones, because I can tell you I'm still working harder to get the ones who haven't read me.
I'm all for that. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Now, I started writing when I was a little kid. I took a detour. I was a lawyer for about 10 years, a trial lawyer, you would call a barrister. But I knew I wanted to write. I was a reader as a young kid, and I wanted to have build my own stories that other people could read. How did it start out for you? Did you know, is this something you knew you wanted to do from an early age, or did it just?
Yes, I wanted to. Oh yes, I wanted to be Prime Minister, and I sat on the Greater London Council at the age of 26. I was a member of Parliament at the age of 29, and I foolishly, stupidly invested in a company called Aquablast. And I lost all my money and was facing bankruptcy when I sat down and wrote my first book, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, the story of 4 young men who lose a fortune. They find out who's stolen it from them, and they steal it back to the exact penny. They're not allowed to go over the top, because that was stealing. Now, I want to excite you, David, with the genius and brilliance of my success. 14 publishers turned the book down. And the 15th publisher managed to publish 3,000 copies, and they just about got rid of them. So I say to anyone listening who wants to be a writer, don't give in and don't think it's going to happen overnight. Cain and Abel was the 3rd book. Now, the fact that Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less has now sold 27.5 million copies, but that's 40 years. It's taken 40 years. So if you've got your first book, don't give in. Don't be surprised you get rejected. Don't be ashamed of that. Keep going, keep fighting, because my beginning was hardly propitious.
No, there's a lot of competition out there, a lot of great books out there. Audiences can be fickle. Sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time, finding someone who really relates and can relate to the material the story you're writing.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because they paid with Cain and Abel, and no one in America had ever heard of me. They paid a fortune, and then they put me on television, and no one had ever heard of me. And you know how vicious the bestsellers list is. I came in the first week at number 37, and my television interviews weren't going particularly well because I hadn't mastered the art of saying Cain and Abel 14 times in 120 seconds. So I hadn't sort of got that. And I was going around the country, and they'd flown me over on Concorde, and they clearly weren't going to fly me back on Concorde, because the second week it went to number 27. And I didn't know this thing in your country, that you have these 15 in the bestsellers list in the New York Times, and if you don't make it in the first 3 weeks, they send the books back. Well, I didn't know that. And so I was in California, and I got a call from my publisher, and they said, now listen, Jeffrey, we've got you onto a show, and you've jolly well got to get a grip of yourself and say Cain and Abel. You'll be on for 3 minutes, and that's 180 seconds, and you've got to see how often you can say Cain and Abel. So I sat down opposite this man, and I was ready. I was prepared, David. I'm caught on by now. And he held the book up in the air, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I have just read this book. It may be the best book I've read in the last 10 years. I want every one of you to go to the shops and buy it now. You'll never regret it. And it went straight to number 1. And I would like on this program to thank Mr. Johnny Carson for changing my whole life, literally. So when you talked earlier about you need a bit of luck or something needs to happen, Johnny Carson literally changed my life by telling, and then it was followed up by Mr. King back in New York, who said, you've got to read this book. And the two of them together literally changed my life overnight.
It's the man. I know when Tom Clancy first came out with The Hunt for Red October, it was done by the Naval Press Institute, 5,000 copy first run back in the 80s. Respectable, but no, not bestseller. And then at a press conference, Ronald Reagan, when he was president, held the book up and said, this is the greatest yarn I've ever read. And that started Tom Clancy's career.
Yes, I mean, and he deserved it. He was a damn good storyteller.
Absolutely.
And actually, Hunt for Red October was a very good book. But you still need, the point you're making, and you're quite right, David, you still need that inch of luck. You've got to get through to people who've never heard of you. Yes. I mean, both of us will fall in the category. I'm either, and I'm so touched by these sentences that are coming up. You're the best author in the world. I love you. I've always loved you. But there's millions out there who've never heard of me. Not alone read one of them, they've never actually heard of me. And they're the ones trying to get through. Now, I've thought about this, David. And if you can take it to one stage further, I'll be obliged. I'd give 1 million copies of Cain and Abel away to 1 million people if I could guarantee they'd read it. Because then, like you, I'd have a chance of them getting the other books. But I haven't worked out how to do that, David, and don't think I haven't given it a lot of thought.
That might be a puzzler for sure. That's Now, do you have? I mean, I said I was a reader. I know you are too. A favorite book of yours that you read that really had an impact on you in a positive way?
I have no doubt that when I grow up, I want to be Stefan Zweig. I think Stefan Zweig is that amazing combination of great writer and great storyteller. I think Beware of Pity is a masterpiece, and I wish I had written it. And he is my hero. He's escaped from Austria at the time of the Second World War. He escaped from Hitler and sadly committed suicide in New York because he thought the Germans were going to win. So we only got 2 novels. His non-fiction work is genius. There's no other word for it, genius. But so yes, when I grow up, David, I want to be Stefan Zweig.
That's great. You know, sometimes, you know, one book really can change your whole perspective on things. It can motivate you to become a writer yourself. 2, it can motivate you to lead a different life. That's the power of a book, and books are sort of unique in that way. They're different. You know, movies, you go and you sit in the movie. I love going to movies like you do, or watching a really good television series and binging them one after the other, but you're sort of a passive participant. You're watching a director's idea of what a story could be. But when I give people a book, and when you do, it's sort of a template, and it's not really finished until each individual reader finishes the book and sort of puts their input on it. You know, I've talked with people about, they read one of my books and 10 different people, and they come away with 10 different ideas of what the book is supposed to represent and what it meant to them. It's a very, very personal endeavor.
Very much so. And you can be, as you've pointed out, you can be very touched by people's recollections or people's statements. And I always said, and if you feel this way, I always say you can tell who's a genuine fan. Just to say they love your book is very flattering, very flattering. But when someone comes up in the street, when Cain and Abel was at its peak, people were coming up in the street and saying, he touched his hat, it was enough. I realized that moment when the two men meet, I hit that person. And there'll be others who say a sentence that they claim will be with them for the rest of their lives. That makes your heart beat. That makes you say, I want to do this again. I want to go there again. And that, God willing, will never end. Because I know you're the same, David. I'm aware. I went to a party this evening before I came to this show, and half the room were coming up saying, we love your work. The new book is exciting. The concept of Princess Diana. And the other half literally had never read a word I'd written. Now you'll have faced that. You'll have been in a room where that happens, and you learn to live with that. The ones that really get me mad is the ones that meet you and then say, why does it take me so long to find you? I've read everything in the last 3 weeks. At a one level, one should be absolutely delighted. At another level. But it comes back to the point you made. There's so much going on, David. To break through to those people, it's very, very hard.
It is. I found that once somebody picks up a book, though, and read it and enjoys it, it becomes a part of their lifestyle, and they can't wait to get the next one and the next one after that. It's just the point of getting them to pick up the first one. I think, at least in our system, oftentimes kids in school are told what to read, and that gives them sort of a very negative view about what books are supposed to be about. They're not enjoying it. They think it's boring. They're reading about something in the 17th century. It has no connection, they feel like, to their lives at present. And they take that connotation with all books going forward, and therefore they just don't pick up another book after they get out of high school or college. But all we need for them to do is find something they're interested in, read it, enjoy it, and then they'll find they can't live without books throughout their whole life.
Yes, I'm always touched, and I'm sure you get the same. I'm always touched by parents who write and say, my son read Cain and Abel, and he's been reading ever since. And it's always boys. Girls don't need to be prompted. They're much better at reading than the boys. So when a mother writes and says that, I'm always very touched indeed. And in India, of course, which is one of my biggest markets, there are 385 million people who speak English. And what they do there, David, I don't know if you've been to India, what they do there is they steal the book. They get it at London Airport. They fly it over to Delhi. They have it on the streets, reprinted 3 days later at a quarter of the price. So I get in this car when I'm coming out of the airport in Delhi. And by the way, the car goes at 3 miles an hour because that's as fast as you can go when you come out of Delhi Airport. And a little boy comes up to me, and he must have been about, I don't know, 8, 9 years old. And he's holding a pile of books, and he knocks on the window. I've only just come from London. The book's only just come out. And he holds up this pile of books, and he says, he knocks on the window. So I wind it down, and he looks at me and he says, would you like the latest Jeffrey Archer? I said, I am the latest Jeffrey Archer.
I was at a signing in my old alma mater, the University of Virginia, and 2 men from Asia were there filming it. And after the event was over, they came up to me and they introduced themselves as my representatives of my Chinese publisher. And they gave me a copy of my latest book in China. And I looked at it, and on the cover was Bruce Willis. And I asked, I said, why is Bruce Willis on the cover? And they said, oh, well, he's very popular in China. I said, I know, but, and I said, it's a movie poster, and no movie's been made of this book. It just came out. He goes, yeah, it doesn't really matter. It just sells a lot of books. So I remember I handed the book back and said, look, I'm a lawyer. I want no part of this. That's copyright infringement. Thank you very much.
How pompous of you, David. I would have signed it. How pompous. You reveal something which I hadn't captured. which you're a Virginia man.
I am.
And I must tell you that my ultimate greatest hero of all is Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
I think he for me is he's everything. He's a polymath. He's absolutely everything. Just why can't you get a president of that standing nowadays, you worm, BALDACCI? Get out there and do something worthwhile. Because honestly, to have produced Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Adams, you can go through them. Where are they now?
Yes, I would like to know. It would be very nice to get back to that. Yeah, I think we need to raise the bar, not lower it anymore.
Yeah.
But I actually went to Mr. Jefferson's University for law school, and Monticello was quite the place, and you know he was definitely an interesting man. So.
I know you may find this hard to believe, but for we English, he is the ultimate.
Yes.
People forget that he was in England. People forget that he was in Paris, in France.
Yes.
And very close behind for me, very close behind Benjamin Franklin. What a remarkable man. There was nothing that man couldn't do. I mean, it didn't seem to matter what he turned his hand to. Where are they now, David?
Yes, yes. They're not running for political office, unfortunately. I'm not sure what they are, but the format seems to have changed, not for the better. So what do you do in your spare time? Penny from Michigan would like to know.
I love the theatre, so I go to theatre. It's been tricky because of COVID, but before COVID, I was going to the theatre twice a week, every week. I love the theatre. My hobby is a charity auctioneer. That's what I do for a hobby. And I've raised about $70 million in 40 years for different charities. But I love it because I'm a show-off, because I like to be on the middle of the stage, bossing everybody around, stealing their money, telling them what to do. I get great fun out of it. And very kindly, lots of people ask me to do it. And I did one last week, and I'm doing another next week. It doesn't stop. So that's the hobby. I'm mad about a game called cricket, which you poor heathen colonialists have never fully got to grips with. And I think it's probably too late to get you, a lawyer you may be, but to understand what a 6 is, what a 4 is, what an LBW is, maybe a bit late in your life, David. So yes, cricket I love, and I love rugby football. I love sport generally. I had the great privilege, this arises from what you've said, I had the great privilege as a child of running for my country. So that was my first breakthrough, really, was that I ran for Great Britain. And when I ran against the United States, I must tell you, it was an amazing race. I didn't actually see the two people I was running against. They were so much better than me. It was embarrassing. And I remembered in particular in the Oxford and Cambridge, Harvard and Yale race, I got introduced to them afterwards. I didn't actually meet them before. And I kind of thought, how can I beat these people other than cutting their feet off? There was no. So the Americans in my day, when I was a youngster, you had the greatest sprinters in the world, and some of the greatest athletes in the world. And it was a pleasure to be on the same track at the same time, even if we didn't appear to be in the same event.
You know, the athletic ability has grown exponentially. Obviously, over the years, they get bigger, faster, stronger. My son was telling me that the world record holder for the marathon just set a new world record at 2 hours and 1 minute. So there's going to be somebody who's going to break the two hour mark for the 26 mile 300 yards.
He's now held the world record for a long time, and I'm worrying because he's 31 years old. So whether he'll break that 2 hours, I don't know. He did, as you rightly say, 2 hours, 1 minute and 40 seconds. And he knocked 30 seconds. This was in Berlin. He knocked 30 seconds off the record. But it's still, I'm afraid, going to be a big deal to get under 2 hours. A big deal.
Yes.
You've got to run, David. You've got to run 5-minute miles, 26 of them in a row.
Yes.
I bet you couldn't do one.
No, If I were in an automobile, I probably could do that.
Ah, yes, yes.
My son said it worked out to be you have to average 13 miles an hour for 26 miles.
Yes,
And that is
exactly right.
But
It's staggering.
well, this has been lovely. It really has been, Jeffrey. It's so nice to talk to you even from a great distance. I love the book. I hope everybody goes out to get it. Again, it's at premiercollectible.com/nextinline. Please read the book. You will enjoy it immensely. Jeffrey, you've been a delight. I wish we could talk a lot longer. I've enjoyed this.
And thank you, David, because it's always a privilege to talk to another author who I admire so much, and you've had a great and distinguished career. So when I was asked to do this, I was very flattered that you wanted to interview me. Very flattered.
Well, same here. It was a thrill for me. This is checked off one of my bucket lists for sure, and I appreciate it. Hopefully, maybe we'll get to meet one day in person.
Yes, please, but that's not my fault, because you're such an introvert layabout. You haven't been to London. We haven't seen you in London. And I know your publishers keep asking you if you'll come to London. So if you will, I'll be happy to take you to the House of Lords and give you lunch. But I'm not going to give you lunch in Virginia, you useless individual.
That's a date. Okay.
That's a date.
Well, thank you again very much. It's wonderful. Have a great tour and the rest of the events going forward.
That's very kind. Thank you very much. And can I say, David, to end on, you and I are extremely lucky people, because we have something we love doing, and what a privilege that is. We're allowed to entertain, but in the end, we can't do it if nobody buys the books.
That's
so
right.
For everybody watching this program, thank you very much indeed.
Yes. Thank you all. Take care.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.